Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Nate and Andy Show. Saturday morning, 8 o'clock, 8:05, and we're here to bring some sense and sensibility to you. So, going to try to tie in the last hour into this hour and keep the conversation going about public safety issues. But what I was going to attempt to do here was, this is Nate Black, Sutter County Auditor Controller. I'm here with Andy, and I've been on the program with Andy many times, and we've talked a lot about the pension, the state pension, the local pensions, and just various fiscal challenges. And so what I'd like to do is try to match in your mind the fiscal challenges to these public safety issues. And what exactly do I mean by that? I put them on a similar, if not the same level of concern. And you might say, well, public safety, being the victim of a crime, et cetera, that's a much more, existential issue to an individual than whether they can pay their taxes or afford, XYZ commodity. Well, to some extent, I would agree with that. But here's how I'm going to draw the line between the two and show the parity. The reason why we have AB 109, which was passed in 2011 by the Assembly in Sacramento, is because of fiscal challenges. Okay, so even when we're talking about the resulting impacts of these, in my mind, poor changes to how we prosecute and enforce law and where we incarcerate, even though I have significant concerns with it, the reason it happened was because of fiscal challenges. They needed ways to save money in Sacramento. And the history of this state, at least for the last 40 years since Prop 13, is that Sacramento is just fine with taking local government money and basically saying do more with less. Because we could talk for quite some time about the various examples of that, but we're going to stick here with the public safety issues, and we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the local issues as well, depending on how much time we have today. So, one thing I wanted to begin with, though, to kind of tie in, and also to discuss. To convey to you all the purpose in a way of the auditor controller in local government. So I just wanted to quickly, over the next couple of minutes, run through this. So what is the value proposition of me, auditor controller of Sutter County, conveying concerns about these issues to you all on the radio? What is it that I'm going to be able to do that's going to help your life and your understanding of what's going on? Here's my approach. So I'm a full-time citizen employee, but I am your employee. I am the citizens of Sutter County's employee. I am not an employee of the government, even though I am for legal purposes. I work for you. And the reason why I love this situation for me is I am independently elected by all 5 districts of the county, and I am here to describe to you exactly what I think as a CPA, as a certified public accountant, but embedded in local government. So I come to local government having done about 9 to 10 years of public accounting experience since graduating from Cal Poly in 2005. So I was in the private sector for 10 years. At the age of 30, I ran for office because I've always been very passionate about this country. I love this country. I love America. I love American exceptionalism, and I love our Constitution. And I'm concerned about all of those things into our future. And my wife and I have 3 children. She's pregnant with our 4th, so we've got 4 kids. That we're concerned about future. We want to make a difference and provide a better. Everybody always wants their children's lives to be better than their own lives, and this is that one generational moment where we're concerned that the next generation's lives and their living expectations of their relationship with government, the taxes, all of that it's going to be worse than the generation that comes before them, and that's the first time in American history, and so it's a real concern. So with that, I bring to local government certified public accounting, private sector experience, and because you all voted for me, I'm independent, and that allows me to have an opinion and to help convey messages and concepts to the people without fear of repercussion. So that's a real pleasure and an honor, and I hold that very seriously, my job in this way. So I wanted to say that my number one gripe in local government that was a concern as I walked into government. In other words, my preconceived notions of what government was about. As I walked in, my number one concern, I'm telling you all, is accountability. And really, it's the lack of accountability. So that's probably a theme we'll talk about over time, but accountability. And what do I mean? We governmental folk work for the citizenry, and our lives are financed largely by said citizenry. We owe it to them to be efficient with their tax dollars at all times. So,
one of the pluses that you have, Nate, is because of your business experience, you have the ability to evaluate new programs and new attitudes with that previous business experience in the civilian world, which most politicians and most government employees don't have. And it's easier if you're spending somebody else's money. And the attitude that you have about looking out for the citizen, that's a great attitude to have. And looking out for having spent your own money and made those mistakes.
Yes, sir. And my wife and I did spend quite a bit of money to get into office as well. We were newer to the community, although my wife was born here. I was newer, and so it was a difficult time fundraising 4 years ago when we first ran. But anyway, we love this community. We're staying. Our kids, we love the schools. We're down at Berry Elementary, an amazing school, wonderful teachers, wonderful administration. I love Sutter County, and I love what I'm doing. So enough about that. But my purpose here, folks, is there's a lot of apathy towards government, and for good reason. However, we want to change government. We want to make things better. So it's my job in my small role here to educate and to provide perspective. I'm an insider. I'm inside the government, the belly of the beast, and I know what I'm looking at, and I want to convey those things to you all to enhance, I guess, your understanding of what's going on and to give you confidence into what needs changing. So excuse me, the article I wanted to talk about a little bit, although this isn't exactly AB 109 public safety concerns, it is the state budget. So we're going to talk a little bit about the state budget, the severity, the absolute significance. It's the large S, if you don't mind me saying. So for the first time in history, California has reached a $200 billion budget. It's actually $199.6 billion as it is today, but that will increase over the course of the fiscal year with budget amendments coming in. For example, this past fiscal year, an extra $5 billion was added to the say $180 billion budget. So we do anticipate this 199.6 definitely getting over 200 billion in the next few months. So let's talk about the growth of the California budget, the history. I love history. History is an amazing thing, and it really should provide a lot of context for what we see in our present. So in 1950, the total budget for the state of California was $1 billion. $1 billion. Total budget, entire state. If you grow that money and you present value it, meaning you inflate the money to today's dollars, that $1 billion would equate to about $17 billion. Now, I'm going to do one more calculation. If you take the population growth from 1950 to 2016, 2017, the increase was 4 times, 4x. So if we take that $1 billion, present value it to $17 billion today, and then multiply that $17 billion times 4 for the population growth alone, you get to about $68-70 billion. And so what happens there is, if everything else was remaining equal in terms of the size and scope of government, the population would generally be the only growth factor in the budget. So again, 1 billion up to 17 billion in today's money, 17 times 4 for the population growth, boom, we're at about 68-70 billion. But that's not the case, is it? Actually, we're at 200 billion. So from 68 billion to 200, that's the spread, in my words, of the increase in the size and scope of government. That is, our state government is becoming all-encompassing, just like our federal government. And encompassing things take a lot of money. So cradle to grave type mentality is very expensive. Now, what I haven't done, but what I was motivated to do as I was researching for this morning's broadcast was I'm going to come up with some tables and charts, and I'm going to map out what the government was doing in 1950 and show it on a relative basis. So here's your $1 billion budget. I want to know, and I'm going to produce, whether it's from public safety or welfare, social services, or roads, infrastructure, and just kind of spread it out amongst the, say, 10 largest categories. Then I'm going to do the same thing for today, and I'm going to then have a comparison. Because when we we just talked about the increase in size and scope of government. It should be about a $70 billion budget. It's a $200 billion. So where did this increase in the scope come? Well, that's what this chart's going to show. It's going to show that over time, our state government has walked into a whole lot of services that we never provided in 1950. And I don't believe in 1950 people were, unable to get goods at the store or to do normal course of life things. So why is it that today we need all of this additional government, but in 1950 we didn't? Right? So that's the conversation we should be having. 68 billion to 200 is an enormous increase. I mean, it should be 70, 68 billion, and we're at 200. What is going on there? So this article, California state budgets represent a seemingly unstoppable rise in government spending. That's the article title by George Skelton, and it's from a couple of days ago, June 14th. So the Governor Jerry Brown and legislative leaders have compromised on a budget deal that lawmakers must pass by midnight Friday. So that would have been, 8 hours ago, or they'll lose their pay. So the following sentences. So it will definitely pass. In other words, since they tied their pay to passing the budget, I want to say they did that under the Schwarzenegger regime when they were sending out IOUs. Once they tied their pay to the budget, they have a whole lot more motivation to pass it, no matter what's in it, because they want to keep their gravy train coming. So Brown will sign it before the fiscal year begins on July 1st.
Wow.
Now, some perspective, it took the state an entire century to reach a $1 billion budget in 1950. So we began about 1850, and as we plodded along for the first 100 years, it took us a while to get to that $1 billion. And then from then on, as you all know, government's increase, the size and scope, the largesse has been growing faster than any private sector business ever. And the costs of that are just absolutely enormous. And
would you say that apathy is a big part of why it's been allowed to grow as big? Because we're too busy, the people don't pay attention to their government.
Yes, I think that's absolutely the reason. They're going to either I don't really care, I'm being taken care of, and I don't even, it's not something that I'm going to waste any time with. I'm too busy on social media or whatever it is, or it's I want to make a change, but it's so big, such a behemoth, and the problem is too large that I'm just going to ignore it because and I have that feeling sometimes. It's actually a constant feeling because I'm here in the largest state in the country. It also happens to be the most liberal, and I look at places like Detroit, and I'm concerned that we're going in the same direction. We're bankrupting in almost every way we look at. We're hemorrhaging. That the state would put law enforcement duties that are always and historically long-term prison sentences, and they just go ahead and move all that to our local sheriffs and say, hey, just do it. And we'll send you money, but do it. Well, every inmate that gets hurt or dies or just the overcrowding in a place that never was supposed to have long-term stays like they're expecting through AB 109. Well, that puts so much burden on a local sheriff, and then boom, so your facilities aren't meant for this, and so you have more injuries, you have more deaths, and those are so expensive. When an inmate passes, like happened in Sutter County, we had 2 inmates pass away, one after another, and this was right before I got into office, so forgive me, I'm not perfect on it as far as my understanding, but it was something like, say, 2012, 2013, maybe even early 2014. I came into office in 2014, and we had just written 2 checks for $800,000 each, $1.6 million for those two passing away. Totally sad. I'm not. I have concern or care about obviously anybody passing like that, but also I have a concern from a fiscal standpoint. Why do we spend $1.6 million? That's just so much money. And well, I think AB 109 was a part of that. So the risks, it's not just the serving the individual on providing them with food and shelter and all of those things, and of course watching them, but it's also those risks, those catastrophic things where they get sick, they have, and if you start to look through the insurance issues, I'm the board member for Sutter County on our insurance JPA, so I do that, and they're very scary, they're very expensive. One incident could be $500,000, $800,000. That's one.
But isn't that a way of they're shirking their responsibility for, like you said, what was normally the state's responsibility? And it is an unfunded mandate because they've cut back on funds that they, quote, were going to send us because of the savings.
That is absolutely right. They pushed it down on us because they can, or they could. So it's really concerning. So I was going to draw one more kind of interesting. I found it to be an interesting analogy here, but let me jump into this. So this is back to the article briefly. We've got a few minutes before the half-hour break. So President Lyndon Johnson declared a war on poverty in the mid-1960s, and he persuaded Congress to create Medicaid health care for poor people, along with Medicare for seniors. In California, Medicaid is called Medi-Cal. Welfare has become more generous, and that was good, but very expensive, the article says. So what I wanted to do was juxtapose or compare what I just read to what was done in the decades just prior to President Lyndon Johnson. So in the 50s, we had a huge infrastructure growth. We after World War II, we spent an enormous amount of money building the highway system in our country and doing various infrastructure projects, bridges and dams. And those, in my opinion, that's what government, is for, or at least in part. For me, it's of course the borders and protecting both within and without the country. That's number one. Number two or three, I feel is the public good, the infrastructure, so that a capitalist economy can flourish. Okay, so I'm okay with that. But where I start to get concerned is then, boom, a generation later, a couple of decades later, in the 60s, Lyndon Johnson now takes us over to providing the social, quote, safety net to everybody, whether poor or elderly, in terms of their medical costs, which, as everybody knows, are absolutely massively expensive. So we have a difference there in how the government was spending money from the 50s to the late 60s, early 70s, from infrastructure to the social state, the social welfare state. And so here's the quotation I wanted to bring in. I love our framers to the Constitution, the Founding Fathers. Those folks are just incredible. So I'm going to read a John Adams quotation. And I wonder if you all will see how I'm drawing this in. John Adams: I must study politics and war, that my sons may have liberty to study mathematics and philosophy. My sons ought to study mathematics and philosophy, geography, natural history, naval architecture, navigation, commerce, and agriculture, in order to give their children a right to study painting, poetry, music, architecture, statuary, tapestry, and porcelain. End quote. So what's going on there? What John Adams is saying, to me, obviously, is that he needs to study these the warfare, really, the politics and war. That's number one, because as you look at history, all of these cultures, all of these nation states, they evolve over time. Well, the beginning is that you have to come to be. Well, how do you come to be? You have to create a space for yourself, and often that means war. That means, getting some elbow room. Then after that, what happens? Well, after you've got your elbow room, now you can start developing your nation or your nation state, your city. And so they do that. And, well, to do that, you need to study philosophy, geography, natural history, ... those things mentioned. And then, boom, then as generations go forward, they start to study things that are more and more distant from war. okay, is maybe the only way I can think of saying it now. Another way to say it is they become decadent. They go down the path, or we go down the path of studying things that are very soft and in some ways not very useful, in some ways useful, but a far cry from politics and war. So here's my joke before the break, okay? So if I were to add on to John Adams' quotation in a very bad way, here's what I would say. ... so that my great-grandchildren would be afforded the opportunity to study, and I have a list. The Feminist Critique of Christianity, University of Pennsylvania. Friends with Benefits, Harvard. These are classes at these institutions.
Oh, wow.
Public Policy Approaches to Global Climate Change, Harvard. Crisis in American Capitalism, Brown University. Marxism After Marx, Brown University. Inequality in American Democracy. Inequality in American Democracy, Princeton. Economic Inequality and the Role of Government, Princeton. Public Policy in the American Racial State, Princeton. Sociology of Gender. Never thought I'd read that. University of Pennsylvania. And then, of course, underwater basket weaving. So what are we doing with those kinds of courses? Is that really what we expect our higher institutions to be teaching our children? That, to me, is indicative of this problem in our country of not valuing the right things. We're
spoiled. This country. My wife teaches conversational English, helps people with conversational English, and she had a lady from Afghanistan. And this lady just could not believe she was here. And she says it's the greatest country in the world. You have clean water and we're safe.
Yes.
How simple is it? I think we have got to such a sense of entitlement. We're just so wrapped up in our things. We're concerned about our puppy getting lost or our cat not liking us or something.
That's right.
If you go up on Facebook, people say, well, I lost my cat. No, you didn't lose your cat. Your cat's out messing around. It's just walking, strutting this stuff down the neighborhood. But anyhow.
That's right.
Clean water and safe. Isn't that amazing that the whole world is like that our country is underwater basket weaving?
You mentioned apathy. If you don't have historical context for why we're where we are, you can't possibly, in my mind, have understanding. So you can't have understanding as to why capitalism is glorious. Why, if you don't understand how capitalism came to birth, and then compare it against the European socialism or the Russian communism or the Chinese communism, if you don't have that understanding and you can't do those comparisons between those very, very disparate ideologies and systems of governance or economic systems, then it's so hard to value or to understand why the American system is exceptional. And, right now we're dealing a whole lot with the First Amendment, and not in our country. We're dealing with the First Amendment like Tommy Robinson in UK. He's in prison right now because he was outside a courthouse trying to film really rapists that were coming to court to get their charges levied. Now, of course, they're what I'd say innocent until proven guilty, but that's in our country, not in their country. But in their country, there is no First Amendment. The UK does not have the First Amendment. Europe does not have the First Amendment. The First Amendment is an American ideal, the right to freedom of speech and religion and press. So you got to have historical context. You got to get up and learn about these things so that you can value and understand why America is so exceptional.
The saying in the Constitution, you have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit, not the guarantee of happiness.
Right. Opportunity, not outcome.
Yes.
Check out the Territorial Dispatch. Papers are weekly and can be obtained free at distribution or by mail through subscription. It's the only locally owned and operated newspaper in the region. The paper is the rest of the story. And also check out the E-Territorial. It's an online version of the Territorial Dispatch which features local news and events for the Yuba Sutter, Colusa, and Nevada County areas. You'll also find daily and breaking news updates, current traffic, and weather information, along with a calendar of local events. Visit the E-Territorial at eterritorial.com.
Well, we're back. This is Nate Black, Sutter County Auditor Controller. I'm alongside Andy Vasquez, Yuba County Supervisor. And we are talking about the state budget. We're talking about AB 109 and public safety issues at the local level. And we are going to now talk just a moment about pensions. I talk about pensions frequently. It's kind of my shtick because it's the behemoth. It's by far the largest fiscal challenge that we face. And I know that people, if you're apathetic towards government and the issues in government, I get it. But then to try to draw somebody into this unfunded pension liability can be very hard, I find, because it is so massive. And okay, let's quantify it real quick. We've talked about it a lot in the past, but just real brief. So in Sutter County, we've got about $150 million unfunded pension liability, which to me, it's a huge dollar, and for our local government and the resources therein, it is a huge number, a huge number. We're about 70% funded, so that $150 million represents the 30% we're not funded. Yuba County is somewhere close, but a little bit smaller. That is, your debt isn't quite as large, but you're around the same funded status, around 68 to 70% funded, like Sutter County. So we're similar in that way. So the state pension debt is in the 240 or so billion. And
You say
I'm
that,
sorry,
so
136 billion. Pardon me.
you say that billion, and people don't understand how much difference there is between a million and a billion. Now, a million has 6 zeros. Okay, a billion has 9 zeros, which means it's $1,000 million.
Right. Yeah, and then let's not even get to trillion, right?
No.
Let's add another 3 on that. When I go to a couple of schools, Berry Elementary, although it goes through 8th grade, and then I go to Gray Avenue Middle School, and I do Junior Achievement. It's a 6-week program. I've mentioned it before here on this program. I love it. It's teaching financial concepts, entrepreneurship, and work readiness to our children. It's awesome. I love it. And what I do, or what I have started doing, because I don't think they're exposed to these kinds of things, but one of the first classes I just write up on the board our on the books federal debt. So I write 21, comma 000, comma 000, comma 000, comma 000, $21 trillion. And I say, hey folks, hey kids, what is this? What's this number represent? So we have just a few minute conversation about it, and it gives them that glimpse of, oh my gosh, that's a lot of zeros. And then I go on to say, and what's not in this 21 trillion is our Medicare and Social Security unfunded debts. Those are not even booked by the federal government. The federal government exempts itself from those debts, from recording and recognizing those debts. Well, those debts, actuaries estimate, are between 100 and 200 trillion dollars. So in other words, our $21 trillion debt that is on the books, which is huge and enormous and almost catastrophic, that is a fifth to a tenth of the Social Security and Medicare debts. So our young people, I think, the more we can educate them on these fiscal existential problems, I believe we can turn the culture and the population of this country towards fiscal conservatism and prudent decision making. I jokingly, though I sometimes am quite serious when I say this, but we need more accountants in office. And it's a knock against attorneys in some ways when I say we need more accountants and less attorneys in office. But I don't mean to knock attorneys. I just mean to say that we need more accountants.
Why?
Well, because there's a lot of great attorneys out there too. But yeah, fair point. We just need more accountants, or at least people listening to accountants, because accountants bring fiscal conservatism. We will tell you why. We will tell you our best recommendation, generally a very conservative approach, whether private sector or government. We're very conservative. We want you to be successful. You are our client, and we don't want to give you an expectation and then you not meet it. So we're going to approach the ask, the question, the transaction you're requesting us to opine on very conservatively. So we need that approach to get into government. or to keep moving into government. I mentioned this before, but I'm really pleased with Trump lately. His policy moves have been stellar. And I did not believe I was going to say that 2 years ago when I voted for him in the general, but I can say that now with confidence. What he's done in Israel, what he's done with deregulation. President Obama had an opportunity to meet with North Korea. Kim Jong-un reached out to him through, if you're to believe Dennis Rodman. And he said, I have these 3 things. Will you please ask him? And President Obama wouldn't give Dennis Rodman the time of day. He didn't want to go meet with Kim Jong-un. He wanted to continue to say that's a problem we can't resolve. And then he says to Trump, hey, that's the biggest issue you're going to encounter. It's like, you didn't even make an effort to speak with him, to speak with Kim Jong-un to resolve the issue, and now you're going to tell the next incoming president that it's the largest issue. That kind of sounds like junk. If it's the largest issue, why didn't you even go to the table?
That's the biggest problem with current politics today, is we do not have successful business people in here who are used to actually completing a task. Okay, I've had so many people say, I've been in business before. Question is, have you been successful in business before? Okay, I've known plenty of people who've gone down the tubes. But, it's the politicians that we have are the people like Willie Brown. And you had a story about Willie Brown that and you're talking about accountants and being accountable for that. It's having spent your own money and made your own mistakes. I made a mistake the other day in entering a credit card transaction. It cost me $960 because I didn't catch it quick enough. Okay, but that leaves a lasting impression. That'll never happen again. But we have people who have been elected and they have not done anything successful. And there's a number of people in certain city councils that I could name you, but isn't that the fact that without the success aspect in knowing how to accomplish something? Because would you ask a kindergartner to do brain surgery?
Certainly not. And I think you're absolutely right, Andy. I think that there's a second part to it, too. Not only do you have to have that experience to draw upon to make good decisions, but then you have to have the will to make those good decisions. And so both of those things are necessary. And I see the former sometimes. Often I don't see the latter. I don't see the will to make positive change, to actually put your money where your mouth is and to reduce. So in Sutter County, we need to reduce the size and scope of the footprint of government. We have to. And it's not Sutter County only in any way. It's everywhere across this state. When you're looking down the barrel of these massive unfunded pension liabilities and these unfunded OPEB liabilities, in other places, other jurisdictions, OPEB, which is other post-employment benefits, and that is retiree medical. I'm going through this quickly, I know, but those are the 2 big, huge debts. So if you like local Medicare and local Social Security, I mean, that's kind of a way to think of it, although that's not a perfect analogy because one's an entitlement, one's a benefit.
But you also have to have politicians you can trust.
Well, actually,
and I don't trust Brown because of past performance. Past performance is an indication of future performance. Don't you think that would be a reasonable assumption?
Yes, yeah, and again, that's why history is so important. And I want to pull back what I just said. Those both, there isn't an entitlement there. The employees in the government earn it. The citizenry earns their Social Security. So both of those are not entitlements. So pardon me for saying that, but they're different in other ways, but not entitlements. So here's the end of the article. This brings it all together for me. It's these kinds of questions that I ask myself, but why does spending keep climbing steeply, decade after decade? Well, Hayes, and I'm not going to go back to figure out what his first name is, but Hayes in this article says there's no pressure to control spending. I never got lobbied once to spend less. Everyone came in and asked to spend more. That's nonpartisan. They just came in and said, hey, you can't raise taxes. Governor Wilson needed to hike taxes, however, and bravely did. That's his word, not mine, bravely. The electorate doesn't seem to be very concerned about spending, Hayes said. So I disagree with that. The electorate is terribly concerned with spending. Now, that doesn't always manifest into picketing on the streets and things, but we, the electorate, I'm pretty confident in this statement that we are very concerned about spending. We're concerned at all levels of government, and the spending must be reduced, and the way to reduce it is to reduce the scope of government. We have to get government off our backs. We need the private sector, the portion of GDP related to the private sector needs to increase, not decrease. We're already at this 20/80 split between our private sector GDP being reduced below that. That is, we're spending so much money to pay for government that it's eating away at our private sector, our production side of our country. So we have got to address the size and scope. And I guess the reason why I brought up Trump a minute ago was big fan of his policy decisions. His rhetoric and things can sometimes be off the wall, but I get in some ways why he does those things. But what I would like to see more out of Trump, this is Yuba City, Marysville plea to Washington, D.C. Please come back and double down on fiscal challenges. Please come back and say, you know what, Congress? Be the president that tells them I want a no more deficit budget. I don't want to go one more inch into debt anymore while I'm president. Unless there's an existential emergency like a war or something that would change that. But that and there's one more place I wanted to go, Andy, if you didn't mind, back
Sure.
to your Prop 54. Mm-hmm. So Prop 54 prohibited the legislature from passing any bill until it's been in print and published on the internet for 72 hours. So there's an interesting loophole here that Dan Walters, iconic at the SAC-B, iconic author, columnist, excuse me, I was searching for the word, at SAC-B. He says the rule's potential loophole is that they don't require a 72-hour wait for the bill's first floor vote, okay? And so what he's saying is often the bill, it'll start in the House of Origin. So let's say it begins in the Senate, and the Senate passes a very draft form bill, very draft. It goes over to the Assembly, knowing that there's going to be amendments and things attached to it. Those amendments come in. Then, boom, after those amendments are finalized in the Assembly, it goes back to the Senate for a second vote. So that's actually the third vote. Original Senate vote to get it over to the House or the Assembly. Assembly votes and amends, gets it back over to the Senate, and then they re-vote, and it's done. It's that first draft form vote at the Senate that is exempted from this 72-hour window. And the reason why I don't like that and why it's a loophole is because that's the moment where you stop legislation from starting. You don't want it to even get traction, because once it gets some traction, it's over at the Assembly. It's like, oh, well, it's going to pass. It's just in what form? We're so great at passing things. And they're not going to be perfect, and sometimes we got to pass it just to figure out what's in it, like Nancy Pelosi infamously said. So that Prop 54 had good intentions. It should work, but as you'd expect, Sacramento has that wonderful loophole. And I'm going to bring us back to, again, the founders and framers, where I draw a lot of inspiration from. And this time we're not going to do John Adams. We're going to move over to Thomas Jefferson. So Thomas Jefferson had an interest in a bill, and the bill, actually a constitutional amendment, I believe. He wanted to amend the Constitution to add an amendment that said no bill will be voted upon until it's seen the light of day for a full 365 days, meaning once a bill is promulgated or originated from a lawmaker, it has to sit for a whole year, and it cannot be amended or voted upon. It must just sit. Then you can vote on it. Again, the only exception being in case of emergency. That is good governance.
There are thousands of bills being passed every year. I used to think that it was bad back in the 70s when 1,000 bills would come through in 1 year. But it's just absolutely amazing paperwork. Mm-hmm. What's your opinion about? I'm going to throw something at you. That devastation in the Central California area because of water restrictions, the smelt, and caused by do-gooders who seem to want to think about, but yet they destroy a thriving industry. What do you think? I think that's criminal. Denying water in a state it's a human right.
Well, it's also shooting the golden goose.
Yep.
How are we going to afford your ecology or environmental concern issues, the remediation thereof? How are we going to do anything if we don't have any money? That is, if you don't have a thriving economy, there isn't enough resources to care about the environment. That's the fact, because that's down the road of what people spend on. Their initial is public safety, is food on the table, is shelter, things along those lines. Down the road is environment. And I'm not saying it's unimportant. I'm just saying that there are things that come before it. Well, if all you do is care about the smelt, you're missing the big picture. You're destroying farmland. You're destroying our gross domestic product in the greatest state in the world, or what used to be. And I know when I say world there, I mean that we're the 5th, 6th, 7th largest economy in the world, and we're just one state of 50. So I'm not a big fan, Andy. I'd take it even further. Look, I'm fine, or I'm happy to love the smelt, or to love all. I love fishing. I love our environment. I want it there for our children, okay? But I would take it a step further by saying it's not that they're stopping us from that. There's way more on I would like to, for example, dredge the Yuba and the Feather rivers. We need to dredge it so that we can have economic boon there. We have an amazing couple of rivers between our two counties. Amazing. And we don't have access to them, whether because homeless are there and they're very aggressive, and so we don't even feel comfortable being down there, but also because the commercial aspect is totally devoid. All you can do is these flat bottoms boats on it. But if we had, those big Delta Kings coming up from Sacramento, and man, you could just see how that could.
We were a seaport.
Yes.
Marysville was a deep water port, and ships came in from the Bay Area.
Almost became the capital of our great state. Marysville did.
Yep.
It was one of the 3 that was considered.
Yep. And but we're taking too simplistic a look at. We're applying common sense and logic, and the things that we're talking about improving, just easing the water shortage in the Central California would do more than Brown could ever hope to do with his limited programs.
Right, and to that end, James Gallagher, Assemblyman Gallagher, Senator Nielsen, big kudos to them for being so passionate about the Sites Reservoir. We need more water. Last time we had water reservoir construction in the state was what, in the 60s? Mm-hmm. And so,
and they had planned on a Marysville Dam. That was all calculated into that series of dams at that point in time. Bullards Bar and then Marysville Dam, and that would satisfy the flood protection. But we've never.
Right, and so again, if you have economic productivity, if you have a well-working machine in the economy, so farmers have access to water, commercial has access to water. Now, obviously, regulation all the time. There are certain things we have to do in terms of regulation that you really shouldn't get rid of. But the lack of infrastructure building, the over care, that's not the right word, but the hyper focus on the smelt means they are like a horse with blinders on. They do not see everything else around them. They're so consumed by saving a smelt, they forget the forest between the trees. They forget that by doing so, they have foregone everything else.
They've taken the civil rights of citizens away. The accountability is not there. But just that one thing would stimulate our economy much more and give them the money for the roads with just that economic surge.
Right. And you, man, with tourism, so back to the local, I love the idea of dredging the Feather River. I absolutely love it. Now, I've been told many times, but the gold that the dredgers would unearth from the dredging would pay for the dredging.
Yes.
And then after that, so you don't even have to pay for the actual work in the initial work, but then after that you have this ecotourism. So that money right there, you can set up a situation where you say, okay, like tot tax, transient occupancy tax, when you stay at a hotel in a jurisdiction. There's always a 10 or 12% tax that goes to the tourism fund, often to the city, like Yuba City or Marysville, or some of it, if it's in the county jurisdiction, will go to the county. So you can create those sorts of situations for the environmental benefits. So 90% of the economic growth from this tourism on the river would go towards, just general fund, and I'm talking about the taxes from that. But you can set aside 10% of those taxes for the elderberry and your
Again,
smelt.
The problem is not the business. The problem is government
right.
trying to guide us along the path when they have no history of success in any way, shape, or form. If you merely let them dredge the river and take whatever minerals they find and keep your hands in your pockets, let business run wild, and let business show you how the 70s and 80s were. And people have no idea because the younger people don't believe in history. The soundbite.
And you know who knows that well, Andy, better than all of us? President Trump.
Oh yeah, he's 72. And for 72, he's not in bad shape. Okay.
And he knows that when you drop the corporate tax rate from 35% to 21%, you have a boon. And we're enjoying that boon currently.
Well, Washington's got his panties in a bunch because he's successful at what he does. He knows how to get there, and people say, as like Obama said, what are you going to do, maybe wave a magic wand? Obama has never held an honest job in his life. He doesn't know how to make a dollar the hard way. And until people actually do that and have that experience, they're going to forever be dependent on the government.
So you're saying a community organizer isn't as qualified as a multi-billion-dollar entrepreneur?
Well, in my books, no.
Oh. Well,
But, according to Nancy Pelosi,
well
you
we'll
gotta
have
pass
to
it.
debate that someday, Andy.
All right. Okay, so we're going to wrap it up right now. But, just remember that Brown, this is 2013, and Brown revised budget reflects a steadily worsening fiscal picture for California. He announced that on YouTube, the state's deficit had grown to $16 billion, nearly twice what he projected when he released his initial budget proposal. So I'm with the government. I'm here to help you.
Mm-hmm. Hey, I want to say hello to my son Liam, my son Tommy, and my daughter Audrey this morning. They're listening to me right now, and love you guys. Andy, thanks for another great show, and I look forward to being on with you again.
Okay, anytime.